Welcome to the Rivio Impact Lab, the podcast in which we explore what it means for small businesses to have real impact in an evolving world. On this podcast, we engage our curiosity around topics like sustainability, diversity and inclusion, and the ethical outcomes of our decisions, all from a small business perspective.
I'm Ellen, and I'm here with my co-host Emily. In this episode, we're going to be speaking with Mike Smith. Mike is the founder and CEO of Aclymate, which is an all-in-one climate solution to help individuals and businesses measure, track, offset, reduce, and report emissions. At Rivio, we've been using Aclymate to track our emissions for the past 2 years. In addition to tracking, Aclymate has helped us to find certified offset projects that we can donate to help us achieve carbon neutrality while working towards net zero. Mike is a former naval officer, having achieved the rank of commander, a featured expert for the U.S. Climate Alliance, and before Aclymate, worked at Renew West, where he worked on one of the largest carbon reforestation projects in the U.S. history, the Collins-Modoc Reforestation Project. This was a 2 million tree project in Northern California. Mike is also the host of the Climate Dad podcast.
Yeah, it was great talking to Mike. We've been using Aclymate as a team and really love the platform. So it was really good to put a face behind the company and just hear his passion and his vision about how to move forward with sustainability and with making actual progress in the climate.
Yeah, and he had some fascinating statistics that he shared with us. I was floored when he brought some of those up, and really, he took this very intangible topic of carbon emissions, and like everybody knows what it is, but we don't really know what it is in tangible terms. And he made it very real. And that's one of the things I really appreciated about this interview.
Yeah, I agree. He really knows exactly what he's talking about, but not only that, he knows how to make it digestible and understandable to people. And that's also part of what Aclymate is meant to do, is to make it not so difficult to track and offset your emissions. And so I think that he's doing a lot of good work, and we're really excited for you to hear this interview.
Yes, we are. We hope you enjoy the podcast.
Welcome, Mike, to the Rivio Impact Lab. We're really glad to be able to talk to you today.
Yeah, good morning, Emily. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So the reason actually that we're talking with you, Mike, is because Rivio actually started working with Aclymate almost a year and a half ago to better account for our emissions and offset those that we couldn't avoid. And we've really enjoyed the service you offer. I particularly have as our sustainability coordinator. Can you kind of summarize what Aclymate provides and what its mission is?
Sure. Let's start with the mission. So the mission for Aclymate is that we want to empower non-experts to be able to engage meaningfully with climate. So more broadly, it's to educate and to empower non-experts to meaningfully engage on climate. And I think that's built into like what we do at Aclymate, which is a lot of our competitors and a lot of alternative options for you. If you're a small business or an individual trying to work on climate, are to work with some expert that kind of will patronize you sometimes, or to work with some sort of system that just assumes that you can't do much. Or they might expect you to start with, like, you have to learn a lot of material before you can meaningfully work. And we just fundamentally disagree with that approach. And so at Aclymate, what we do is we built a software system that helps people to measure, report, reduce, and offset their footprint. And then along the way, as they're doing that, you can almost think of it as like a QuickBooks of carbon accounting. While they're doing that, they learn and they develop expertise in climate by engaging in it rather than having to have the expertise before engaging in it.
That's really important. And I love that distinction because I didn't come into this work being an expert. And I think Aclymate was one of the first organizations that we engaged with. And it's made it very helpful to actually want to track, because it doesn't feel incredibly overwhelming and like we can't do it. So I think the mission that you just expressed is something that we've actually experienced. And so you are fulfilling that mission. I want to kind of get into the background a little bit of what inspired you to found Aclymate and kind of how your prior work experiences shaped your approach to climate solutions.
Yeah, I've had a kind of a meandering career path. I grew up in Boise, Idaho, and I had an experience with a wildfire when I was a kid. It's called the Loman Fire. Burned about 44,000 acres, which at the time was one of the first mega fires. Anymore, that's actually a pretty small fire, but at the time, it felt like the whole state of Idaho was burning. And as a 9-year-old, this is during the Cold War, it put up a mushroom cloud. And that was just very memorable to me. But my grandfather was a forester, and he told me that he was one of the first to understand fire adapted ecologies. And he told me that to not worry that the forest would grow back. I said, "What do I know? I'm 9." So I went off, I joined the Navy, saw the world. I was an F-18 pilot, active duty for about 12 and a half years active duty. Postings kind of throughout the world. I did Italy, Japan, throughout the American Southeast. And then in 2010, I got married and I brought my wife to Idaho to show her where I'd grown up. And we went by the scar of that fire. It was 22 years after it come the fire. And, everybody has this experience when they go back to visit the place that they grew up, it feels like a lot of it's changed. But what was most jarring to me is the thing that hadn't changed was that fire. Like, it was still mostly bare. It was not coming back. That led me down a path. I'd actually studied like carbon markets at the Naval Academy. And so that led me down a path of getting out of the service to start my first company. My first company was called Renew West. It's still an active concern. My partner over there, John Cleland's doing a great job with it. Renew West was a carbon offset project developer. Specifically, we focused on planting trees in areas burned by wildfire and leveraging carbon markets in order to fund that activity. That was a challenge. A lot of people weren't kind of believing in carbon markets or even climate change at the time, but John and I both saw it through. And together we ended up planting 2 million trees in Northern California. It's the largest project of its type in U.S. history. So super proud of that. Took my kids there to plant the first 100. A little core memory built there. But along the way, I also was an advisor to the U.S. Climate Alliance, which were the 26 states that stayed in the Paris Accords the last time Trump pulled us out. I was advising folks on natural and working lands, climate market or carbon markets, climate policy, and I was frustrated because the people that with education and that cared about the material, they didn't grasp this immediately either. And I knew that 90% of the problem for climate is not offsets but emissions reductions, and that if these people were having a hard time grasping it, we had a system that was too complex. And so that led me, with John's approval, to start a side project internal to Renew West called Aclymate that grew its own legs, and we ended up spinning it out, and I went with it. That was with my co-founder, William, here at Aclymate, which is to help people to meaningfully measure, reduce, offset, and report and offset their footprint without having to develop that expertise. So there shouldn't be a barrier to getting started or your work on climate. So that's my background. And then on my personal life, I'm continually, this will be my 15th anniversary this year to my wife, Lindsay. And then we've got 2 great kids.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And thank you for your service, to our country and then to continually to the globe. That continues on. I think that it's really interesting when I was kind of reading up a little bit on your background, how fascinating it is, the journey that you took to get where you are, and then all the incredible work that you've been able to be a part of, and now taking that work and wanting to make it simple for other people to participate in that, I think is incredible. So you did touch on this just a little bit, but could you explain, because this is something I had to learn, the difference between reducing emissions and offsetting emissions, and your thoughts on these 2 different ways of tackling climate change?
Sure. So every American produces somewhere in the ballpark of about 19 tons of emissions, of carbon dioxide emissions every year. So my family of 4, if we were the average American family, would be approaching 80 tons of emissions. Put another way, you could think of it like as you're driving down the car, if you driving in a typical American car, if you were dumping about a pound of garbage out the window every mile. We don't see it because it's an invisible gas, but in reality, we're using the atmosphere as a large dumping ground for pollution. And just because we don't see it doesn't mean it's not a big problem. And so the atmosphere, nature has ways of capturing that. Planting little trees was one way to kind of deal with that. And so that's, the carbon cycle. A lot of us learned about that in school. But we're doing it faster than nature can accommodate. And so as a result, the atmosphere is piling up with pollution, this invisible carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. And so we cannot offset our way out of that problem. There's nothing that we can do technologically or with nature in order to completely overcome the amount of pollution that we're putting into the atmosphere. And so that's referred to as an emission because we're using a scientific term, but you could also use it as a dumping if you wanted to be a little bit more direct. And so we have to stop that. Now, the good news that people don't hear on climate very often, actually, is that when I first started in this work, and we were dumping more and more and more every year. In the last few years, however, we've been approaching a peak. So we're not dumping more relative to last year. We're dumping about the same amount. So the curve is starting to bend. But in order to meet our goals with the Paris climate goals, and the Paris climate goals are based on a bunch of scientific tipping points. I could really nerd out on that if you're interested.
Yeah, sure.
But nonetheless, these tipping points, if they are to occur, they have some very meaningfully bad impacts to humans, civilization broadly. And so the goals there are is that we should try to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius, so above the pre-industrial average, or at the very least, we need to stay below 2 degrees of warming. And the pathway to doing that means is that we've got to cut roughly 50% of our emissions by the end of this decade, and we need to cut about 90% of our emissions by 2050. That last 10% is known as kind of hard to abate emissions, and that last 10% is where they think that we can get to a net zero by offsetting the remaining 10%. Currently, the planet can't do that either, so we also have to build up the capacity of offsetting systems, things to capture carbon out of the atmosphere. Now, there's a little bit of room in the middle there where there are certain things right now where if you're working on your emissions, there are other entities that maybe want to work on their emissions but can't afford to do it, and you can help to participate in that by paying them some additional money in order to be able to do that. And so there's within the offset categories, there's things that are carbon removals, planting trees, big machines, for example, also that suck carbon out of the atmosphere are examples. But then there's these emissions reductions or that you're paying somebody else to do it. Short version, start with your own footprint, cut it as best you can. Remember that this is a multi-year journey. So if you cut a lot this year, great. Remember, you got to do it next year. Can't cut so much this year. It's okay. Keep working on it next year. But also in the process there, you also need to be working on offsets there. It's kind of like peanut butter and chocolate. Both are great individually, but together they make a little bit happier of a snack.
Have to agree with that. Absolutely. I think that's a really helpful way to look at it and to keep in mind that progression approach to it, that you're continually trying to reduce to build upon that momentum rather than if you can't do it all at once, just not bothering to do it at all. And that example that you gave, or the metaphor of that it's like dumping out, garbage, would you say a pound of garbage a mile? How much?
About that. It's about 0.8 of a pound per mile for the average American internal combustion car.
I've never heard that before. That's very evocative imagery. I think that's really helpful. And I will keep that in mind because that is really telling for just how much we're putting into the earth and expecting it to be able to deal with. So let me switch gears a little bit and talk about Aclymate as a business. What are some of the biggest challenges that you've encountered in your journey with Aclymate, especially as a climate action organization? What are some of the challenges that you've come across with climate action on a larger scale via Aclymate?
So most people would expect that you actually want, I'd want to talk potentially about politics or people that are climate denialists. It's actually not that big of a thing. In every market, there's always going to be people that are laggards, and there are people that are going to be early adopters. And so it's not something that I worry about. The thing that I do that was early on was difficult is that the people, particularly some within the investment class, had a hard time visualizing that this would be a necessary thing that would be adopted more broadly than by a couple of evangelists, effectively. And that for me was frustrating because in the product adoption curve, if you're an investor, you should also understand that, like, yes, there are those, you start with those evangelists, but the momentum builds from that. And so that was some of our early pain points associated with that. The other thing that we were focused on is that as a business was that there was this older mindset of people that just wanted to be like carbon neutral. They just wanted to know what their footprint was and buy the offsets. And so we tried to have like this free accounting software, and people didn't like it. Because we were trying to help them to reduce their emissions before they did the offsets, which was great. But they just saw it as like a hassle because like it's a little bit more work than to just like do kind of a wild guess and buy some offsets and move on. And so we had to figure out like, no, actually what we need to be doing is focusing on selling the service of emissions reductions. And when we did that, it's a very low cost, very affordable option for companies. That's an important part of what we do. We don't want to be a barrier there. But when we do that, we actually ended up pairing up with the right people, the folks that were interested in emissions reductions and measuring and reporting their footprint associated with that. And by charging for that, we actually could improve the experience because we could integrate with like some of their data systems, their utility bills, just made a lot more automations and integrations that would make the experience better. We still sell offsets. We have a great offset marketplace. And that's integrated all in there. And like we talked about, chocolate and peanut butter, they go together. But that's been that. The one thing that we've been really encouraged by here recently is that we're starting to see earlier moving out of the kind of the early adopter phase into people that are doing it not because they want to, but because they need to. And we've been really excited. One customer I really like talking about, they manufacture rolled wipes. This guy doesn't care at all about climate. He's a very kind of bottom dollar sort of guy, as a business person. A major customer of his does care. And in order to maintain that contract relationship, he has to report his footprint. What's even more exciting is that guy is actually exploring the idea of putting together like a science-based target, which to me is just like this, like plant the flag, the market has arrived kind of moment. Like I'm really, really excited about that.
Right. That's great to hear. And it's really encouraging because you don't get a lot of encouraging news around this topic. So I appreciate you sharing that. I know that for us at Rivio, we had those conversations, a couple of years ago of this is going to turn into something that's a need, but we want to jump on it before that because it's a value that we actually have that we want to live out. But I think that there is an awareness that this is going to become not something that is just like a nice to have, but that you have to do to maintain a significant client base because a lot of people do care. And I think that's important to remember as well.
Yeah, 100%. Like every industry is a little bit different, but the leaders in each industry from this perspective are being established right now. They are the ones that are going to accrue the brand value associated with being thought of as the leader rather than the one that has to comply. The laggards are also being identified, the people that are not wanting to get on this until it's being rammed down their throats. You're losing the opportunity to establish yourself from a brand recognition.
Absolutely. And I think that's important to remember. And, you want everyone to take part based on value systems, but if they're not going to do that, then at least recognizing that this is really good for your brand. This is good for you to be on top of things rather than, like you said, just have to come along for the ride because it's been crammed down your throat. That's not a good look for an organization. So I think that's fantastic to keep that in mind. And I'm glad to hear that story. Very encouraging.
It's fun, isn't it?
Yeah, that's great. And continuing along that, you did share a little bit of some success. Could you share a specific success story from your work that really shows kind of the power of combining technology with environmental sustainability?
Yeah, I have a few stories there. So one is that that manufacturer that I talked about that is setting a science-based target. Like we enable them to be able to measure their footprint, keep a relationship, and then now they're taking the next step on their sustainability journey. Love that. Another one that I really love is a company that we were working with. They train people from all over the world, and the thing that they train people in that has to be in person. And it's a great sustainability story, the stuff that they do, but there is flights associated with this. And so they have this assumption of hey, we can't do anything about our footprint because, these people are flying in from all over the place. And so our mantra at Aclymate is measure, reduce, offset in that order. And so I said, okay, yeah, let's just see. Let's start measuring your footprint. Um, and so what they ended up doing is they realized that they had these two guys that drove F-150s 40 miles each way to work. And when they didn't have a class in, if they told these guys to stay home and work remotely, which the two gentlemen were very interested in doing anyways, they could cut 8% of their emissions. Like with all that international flighting, so don't, be careful of the assumptions. The data will unlock opportunities for you. Another one that I'm really proud of is that we were working with an event, a major like concert, and people fly in to go to this thing. Same sort of thing. A lot of emissions associated with that. The only way that they could really kind of get away from that is if they just kind of stopped having some of those flight emissions. But hidden in the data was actually that they had a huge amount of emissions of people getting from the airport to the event itself. A lot of these folks were renting a car, parking it, and spending like 5-6 days there. So for this event, they had a bad experience of getting there. People were flying to this airport, spending a bunch of money to get to this airport, spending a bunch of money to like take to rent a car to drive and park it and then hang out there for days. And it's a concert. So what we propose to them and what they're exploring on doing is actually if they know when these flights are coming in, provide a bus service with a musician on board, get the party started.
Yeah.
Like there's no reason you can't, like, it's a better experience. You're going to have a better emissions footprint, and people are going to save money. It's a win all the way around.
That's fantastic. What a good idea. I think it gives you an opportunity to be creative, to try new things, and to stand out in that way. And I love what you said about how, and it goes along with measure first, because the data unlocks opportunities for you, and that assumptions are often wrong. And there is a lot that we can do that maybe we're not even aware of. So it's very exciting. I love, rather than ending on challenges, ending on success stories, I think is great. So I do want to talk about, you're also the host of a podcast, the Climate Dad podcast. How did that come about? And what's your mission behind the podcast?
Yeah, so Climate Dad's a name that my staff bequeathed to me. For those of you that are not watching but are listening, my backdrop actually is a bunch of artwork that my children did as they were growing up. I didn't have the heart to throw it away, so I put it into my Zoom background. So there's a little bit of that, but there's also this component of being kind of like the climate expert on our team is that like I take things that are kind of complex and scary and make them a little less complex and a little less scary. And not to be patronizing, but that's what a parent does a lot. And so I give off strong dad vibes. So they started calling me Climate Dad to my face even. And so that was kind of the birth of the moniker. The podcast is on a pause actually right now because we are expanding it, bringing in potentially a co-host in the veteran space. So actually it'll be the ability to talk about that. So stay tuned to that. You can still go to theclimatedad.com in order to link to there. That's also on my website at acclymate.com/theclimatedad. Yeah, we're kind of expanding that.
That's an exciting reason for a pause, looking to the future and to expansion. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And yeah, you mentioned you have two kids. As a father, I'm a mother, so I am very interested in your answer to this question. How do you approach teaching the next generation about climate change, sustainability, and the importance of action in a way, especially that motivates them to action rather than, scares them?
So part of my goal when I started that podcast, The Climate Dad, and some of my social media stuff was to just educate people more broadly. And I think this applies to your kids as well. You shouldn't lie to your children. And so you shouldn't hide the truth from them, but you also shouldn't embellish it, and you shouldn't make them fearful. So, here's kind of the blunt truth of it, right? We are never going to be in the climate we grew up in again. Like that's gone. And so when people think about like, oh, climate change is irreversible, that's true. Climate change is irreversible. We are already there. There is no path to where we've been. It's only to where we're going. In the forestry space, they used to talk about like that we need to restore forest to kind of about a 1900 state about like what forests were like around the turn of the 20th century. And I've always thought that was a false paradigm because we're never going back to that. We need to be thinking about where we're going to be at the turn of the 22nd century, the end of this century. And that's where we need to be focusing on that. But at the same time, we also have a lot of choices in the paths that we walk. And those paths, vary from problems to apocalypse. And you, right now, have a lot of agency in which path we get to choose. And it can be very easy to feel overwhelmed and to say, like, hey, there are, powerful forces in play, but there's a lot in climate accounting that I actually think gives us a superpower, which is to say your footprint relates to my footprint. Right now, sitting in my office, I can choose, the temperature that I set. I can choose how much electricity I use. I don't get to choose what the power plant, produces for that electricity, but there is a relationship there. As they improve their footprint, my footprint will improve. As I improve my footprint, their footprint will improve. And frankly, that's really the power that we have is through a little bit of collective action. Not to use too much of an activist term there, but I guess to say that, it takes many soldiers to make an army. And no one soldier will win the war on climate, but, no army is formed, in the climate fight without having a lot of foot soldiers in it. That's kind of the story I tell my children. It's also worth remembering that humanity has been through some tight squeezes before, and families were still happening during that time. Children were raised. There are a lot of complex things about what causes people to start families. But if you're making that decision based on climate, I would say don't do that. There's a lot of hope for the future, and frankly, if we're going to have hope for the future, it's going to come from that generation of people that were raised by people concerned about the climate in order to make an impact on it now and into the future.
Right, absolutely. I mean, these are the types of conversations that we're starting to have. I have a 12-year-old and a 7-year-old, and my 12-year-old especially has a lot of questions about this type of thing. And I think you're right. It is important to be honest and say, well, here's how you can take steps so that rather than being fearful, we're acknowledging and we're moving forward into the best possible future that we can create from here on out. So that's great. So once again, switching gears, the Rivio Impact Lab specifically reaches out to small businesses, to small business owners, to kind of help them figure out how they can make an impact, even in from a small business perspective. So for anyone listening that is a small business owner looking to become more climate conscious, what's the first step that you would suggest that they take to align their operations with appropriate sustainability goals?
There's a lot of, kind of generic recommendations that I could give, and I'd be happy to give a few of them. Your business is going to be different than others, but there's a lot of commonalities, and we can talk about that. But the first one that I would say here is set a budget. If it's not money, at least time. One of the things that then Senator Biden used to say is, don't tell me about what you care about. Tell me about what your budget is, because that'll show me what you care about. And so we all, small business owner myself, you have to be very careful about, the dollars spent, and then what you're spending your time on. But if you want to be committed to sustainability, carve out something. I don't care what it is, but just put in a dollar amount or a time amount that you're going to spend on it. That will inform a lot about what you do on a sustainability path. So probably the first thing is just carve out some time in order to explore your options. Sustainability is a very, very broad category. It touches practically everything that you do. It includes, everything from microplastics to air pollution to recycling programs. And you only have so many hours in the day. So make sure that if you have a budget, that you're spending it on a thing. Now, if you're interested in going down a climate journey, which is a slice of the sustainability problem, and it also touches a lot of things, we'd love to help you at Aclymate. So a little plug for us there. But same sort of thing. Set a little bit of time, a little bit of a budget. Think about again, our mantra: measure, reduce, offset. There are some free tools if you're small and you're looking to kind of get started without like spending any money on it, and you can go ahead and start to explore that, and that'll tell you roughly where your footprint is and where your emissions are coming from. And then once you do that, you can go ahead and get started.
That's great. Yeah, and I think everyone, like you said, I mean, even if you have to start with the free tools, everyone can start somewhere to just get involved. And like you said, measuring as even your first step. That's something that we really had to start taking on because we were like, well, we don't know how to reduce if we don't even know what we're putting out. So again, I'm glad that you plugged Acclimate. I will do it a second time. Acclimate is a great resource for being able to do that. And so you talked a little bit about, like the Paris Climate Agreement. And if you could set one climate goal, this may be a hard question to answer, I don't know, but one climate goal that everyone you feel could rally around, what would that be and why?
So it's worth talking about the idea that we're probably not going to achieve our climate goals, like collectively from the Paris goals. The Paris pathway is that we need to cut about 50% of our emissions every decade for the next 3 decades. So 50% by 2030, 50% of the remainder by 2040, 50% of that remainder by 2050 gets you to roughly 90%. And so that's what the goals were. And that seemed like an achievable thing, that you do the hard, the big stuff, early, and then do the harder stuff later. The problem is that's not really how human systems work. I am 100% skeptical we're going to get our goals by 2030. We're not going to cut 50% by then. But I am also very optimistic that we're going to achieve our goals by 2050. And so if you think of what the two curves would look like, the reason I'm optimistic about 2050 is because human systems tend to work in exponential curves, whereas that you're growing, if your company's at a certain size, I mean, you can, grow by 20% this year and 20% the next year and 20% the year after that. That's not a 60% growth. That's, approaching 80, 90, 100% growth, right? And so that's how human systems work. Put it another way, if you are, let's say if you're doubling your impact on climate every 5 years, that means that you're going to feel like you're losing until you're about 5 years from the end. And so the difference between the curves of what like the Paris goals are and what I think we're actually going to achieve is the Paris goals are like a fairly steep downslope now, and it kind of shallows out and gets close to the x-axis over time. We're staying fairly high and going to, I think is going to kind of nosedive down towards the x-axis as we approach 2050, right? And so that delta between those two curves, for those of you that took calculus, that delta is our climate future. Like, and how close we can get those two curves is going to be how successful we are and what path we're choosing. And so I guess the goal that I would put here for everybody is to make an impact this year, but as a percentage, and see if you can do it again next year and the year after that. Try to get yourself on some sort of exponential emissions reductions path. Because that's what's really going to shrink that gap. If you can go 10% this year, great. Do 10% again next year. But if you can make that at 12%, it doesn't seem like all that lot. But if you can keep that 12% up, then you're going to make a lot more impact a lot more quickly.
Absolutely. That's great advice. And I think something that is very clear and that everyone can, like I asked, rally around. And I love hearing from an analytical perspective where it's clear that you're very aware of the data and the science behind all of this, and there is still optimism there. Not false optimism. We're not going to hit it in this particular time frame. We're not going back to where we were, but there is still hope to avoid, an apocalyptic future, and we can do this. So I love that.
I mean, I could even paint a little sunnier of a picture for you. There's an art movement called solar punk. Have you ever seen it?
I don't think I have, but that sounds great. I would love to.
Yeah, so like there's the steampunk, which is kind of like this retro machine sort of thing, but solar punk is kind of like this futuristic, like this world in which we have, like modern, new in inventive technologies kind of surrounded by nature in the same way. And I think that there's a real pathway for that, not to, just to really let my nerd flag fly. It's a little bit like kind of the future of it's like a Star Trek world, kind of, we can have this sunny world where we've gone through the difficult times, and we have this future where we've come out better, both like in a societal organization, technological, but also nature, like that we have come to a place where nature, finds a new balance.
I love that. I think that's fantastic. If that is what, nerding out is, then I'm all about it.
I'm your nerd then.
That is a future that I think I can get behind, and I would love to look more into that solar punk movement. That's fantastic. I think this is a good place to start wrapping up, but before we do, I just wanted to ask, Mike, we ask all of our guests, since this is the Rivio Impact Lab, what does impact, the term impact, mean to you?
I think impact to a certain extent is identity. I've had a lot of identities in my life, fighter pilot, now veteran, father, husband. One of the things I used to do in my time in the Navy Reserve, I ended up retiring out of the Navy Reserve, was I did a lot of funerals. Every military veteran's entitled to a military burial if they're so inclined. And so as a result, I would do about 40 funerals a year on average. I was kind of in the background, didn't do a whole lot other than my little bit of folding up the flag. But you get to kind of really appreciating the mark that you leave at the end of your life. And very little of it actually has to do with the money you made. Very little of it has to do with your titles. A lot of it has to do with the impact that you left upon the people that cared about you and upon the world around you. And so people would talk about the stories at these funerals of the things that people did. My own grandmother, she after my grandfather retired, she was like, "Cool, my turn." And then she started running a thrift shop. That was there to raise money for, she was really frustrated that disadvantaged community didn't have streetlights, and by gum, she was going to get streetlights for those folks. And so she started that, and that was the story people told about her. And so that's what I think about impact. Maybe a bit in the Stoics mindset of memento mori. Remember that one day you will die. And then within that construct, which is what are you doing with your time on Earth? And if you are spending that time well, people will tell stories of the legacy you left.
I love that. I could not agree more. That is a fantastic story. Your grandmother sounds incredible.
She was.
You see something that is wrong in your community and you say, well, I'm going to fix it. I'm not going to wait for someone else to fix it. And I think that's the lesson that we can take from this conversation as well. So, Mike, this was an incredible conversation. I feel very encouraged. And I thank you so much for your time with us. Before we let you go, where can people find you? You did mention it a little bit, but I'm going to let us end with that.
Yeah, sure. Acclymate is the company. Had to tech bro it up because the normal verb to acclimate to change to our changing climate was taken. So you can find Acclymate at aclymate.com. Again, that's aclymate.com. There's some contact information there associated with me. You'll also can go to theclimatedad.com, and that will redirect you to a couple things. I'm on LinkedIn, social media, email. I don't think I have carrier pigeon, but other than that, I'm in all the places.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for your time on the Rivio Impact Lab. We really appreciated having you here.
I enjoyed being here. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you. Want to make an impact? Start with measuring. When it comes to eco-friendly practices, you can start small. You can't change what you don't know, so even if you aren't ready to offset or reduce, you can begin with simply tracking your energy, waste, and water usage. Thanks for listening, and make sure to do good in the world. If you have questions you'd like us to address on the podcast, you can reach us at info@riviocreative.com. Subscribe wherever you listen so you don't miss out on any of our incredible upcoming guests. We'll see you soon at the Rivio Impact Lab.